What if everything you thought you knew about Prince Harry was a lie? That question alone makes you pause, doesn't it? The headlines scream tales of charity, heroism, royal rebellion, and celebrity drama. But beneath the polished public persona, the interviews, the appearances, the waves from the balcony, there has always been a shadow, a whisper, a rumor, something that no one dared to say aloud for decades. Until now. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine a man whose entire life has been lived under the scrutiny of the world's gaze. Every word dissected, every relationship examined, every action, no matter how small, turned into fodder for tabloids, magazines, and the endless cycles of social media. Prince Harry, the younger son of the late Princess Diana and Prince Charles, has always been painted as the charming, troubled, yet relatable prince. He laughed with audiences, fought in wars, championed causes, and shared his personal pain with the world. And yet, behind the carefully crafted image, a secret has been simmering, one that threatens to rewrite everything we thought we knew about him. For decades, whispers have lingered about the most sensitive topic imaginable: Harry's parentage. Scandalous? Yes. Unthinkable? For many, absolutely. And yet, those whispers never went away. They floated in the background of every royal scandal, every tabloid headline, every rumor about Princess Diana's relationships. Most dismissed them as the reckless imaginings of gossip columnists or bitter journalists looking for clicks. But what if they weren't just rumors? What if there was truth hiding behind the carefully curated public narrative? Now, the impossible has been confirmed. DNA tests, legal battles, and private investigations have finally shed light on the long-simmering controversy. James Hewitt, the name that sent shockwaves through the 1990s, whispered about in hushed tones, infamous for his scandalous relationship with Princess Diana, has now been confirmed as Harry's biological father. Yes, the same James Hewitt who captivated the world with his charm, his military reputation, and his connection to the late Princess of Wales. The results are in. The science doesn't lie. The question that has haunted the palace and the public alike for decades has been answered. But why does this matter now? Why is the world suddenly paying attention to a story that has lurked in the shadows for more than 30 years? The answer lies in timing. This revelation has arrived at a moment when the monarchy itself is under unprecedented scrutiny. Global audiences are questioning the relevance, authority, and transparency of one of the most iconic institutions in human history. A prince stripped of his title because of DNA results? That is not just headline news, it's a seismic shockwave. It shakes the foundations of the monarchy, threatens the carefully guarded reputation of the royal family, and forces millions of people to reconsider the story they have been told. And yet, the drama does not stop at science and scandal. There is emotion, betrayal, confusion, fear. Imagine being Prince Harry. Imagine growing up adored for your spirit, your charm, your courage, only to discover that your entire identity, the very thing that defined you, was called into question by the very institution that shaped your life. Every photograph, every public appearance, every royal ceremony suddenly feels different. The warmth of the crowd becomes a distant memory. The cheers, the applause, the waves. Now hollow echoes in a life that has suddenly become unrecognizable. We have to rewind, though, to understand just how this storm has built over time. Because this isn't merely about the DNA results. It's about history. It's about Diana, the woman whose love, heartbreak, and untimely death left a permanent mark on the royal family. It's about James Hewitt, whose charm, charisma, and connection to Diana created ripples that extended far beyond a simple affair. And it's about Prince Harry, the man caught in the middle of a narrative that he never asked to star in, yet one that would define him for the rest of his life. Let's take a moment to consider the whispers themselves. For years, journalists, palace insiders, and even some members of the public speculated about the possibility. The timing of Diana and Hewitt's relationship, combined with certain physical resemblances and personality traits, fueled speculation. Some dismissed it as ridiculous. Others, however, quietly wondered, noting subtle cues and private anecdotes that never made it to the tabloids. The truth, as we now know, was always there, buried beneath layers of secrecy, loyalty, and fear. And then came the DNA. modern science, unblinking and unyielding, revealed what speculation could only hint at for decades. The results were definitive. The shockwaves reverberated instantly, not just through the palace walls, but across the globe. Media outlets scrambled to cover the revelation. Social media erupted with debates, disbelief, and indignation. Public opinion splintered. Supporters of Harry expressed outrage over the invasion of privacy, while critics pointed fingers at the monarchy itself, questioning how such a secret could have been maintained for so long. But the science, as always, told a simple story. James Hewitt is Harry's biological father. That single fact carries with it consequences far beyond personal identity. For the monarchy, it challenges the narrative of legitimacy. For Harry, it redefines a lifetime of relationships, both familial and public. And for the world, it transforms the man we thought we knew into someone entirely different, forcing us to confront uncomfortable questions about truth, perception, and loyalty. And yet, even as the world reels, the human element cannot be ignored. Behind every headline, there is a person, Harry. A man who has spent decades grappling with his identity, his grief over losing his mother, his complicated relationship with his father, and now, the revelation that the very foundation of his life was built on a lie. One can only imagine the nights spent in quiet reflection, the endless questions. Who am I? Who do I belong to? How do I move forward in a world that suddenly sees me differently? This is where our story truly begins, in the tension between public perception and private reality. Because while the headlines scream scandal, the human drama is far more intricate. It involves secrecy, deception, loyalty, betrayal, and ultimately, the revelation of a truth that no one, neither palace officials nor the public, was fully prepared to face. By now, you're probably asking yourself, what happens next? How does the palace respond? How does Harry cope? And perhaps most importantly, how does this revelation reshape the monarchy itself? These are questions that demand answers, and the journey to those answers is filled with twists, shocks, and moments that will leave even the most ardent royal watchers reeling. In the chapters to come, we will trace this story from its origins, the relationships, the rumors, the secrets, to the DNA revelation that changed everything. We will explore the emotional toll on Harry, the reactions of his family, and the public chaos that followed. We will reveal letters, private conversations, and documents that paint a vivid picture of betrayal, intrigue, and heartbreak. And we will bring you to the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored, a moment that shook the monarchy, redefined a prince, and left the world asking, who is Prince Harry, really? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The story is far from over, and the revelations that follow are more shocking than anyone could have imagined. From secret letters to emergency palace meetings, from the public's furious reaction to Harry's private heartbreak, the journey ahead will take us deep into a drama that feels ripped from fiction, but is, in fact, real life. The world has always seen Prince Harry as a man of charisma, charm, and heart. From the moment he appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace as a toddler, waving to thousands of well-wishers, he was a figure destined to live under the public gaze. But what happens when the image you see isn't the full story? When every smile, every wave, every public appearance masks a deeper, hidden reality. For Harry, the life of a prince has always been a performance, a balancing act between duty and identity, expectation and personal truth. Even as a child, Harry's life was anything but ordinary. He grew up in a palace that was more than a home. It was a symbol of tradition, responsibility, and public scrutiny. Every birthday, every school event, every family gathering was documented, analyzed, and broadcast to the world. Yet, despite the attention, there was a deep sense of normalcy he yearned for. He wanted to be a boy who played football without cameras, who laughed without reporters, who lived without constantly being defined by a legacy he never chose. But those moments were rare, almost non-existent. As he matured, Harry embraced his public role in a way that few could manage. He carved out a persona that balanced humor with heart, rebellion with respect. He became known for his daring antics, breaking palace protocol with a cheeky grin or engaging in playful mischief that made headlines worldwide. Yet behind the playful exterior was a man grappling with complex personal emotions. The grief of losing his mother at a young age, the complicated relationship with his father, and the ever-present weight of living up to the expectations of royalty. By his teenage years, Harry was already a media sensation. Every misstep became a story, every achievement a headline. The tabloids documented his life with obsessive detail, scrutinizing his friendships, his behavior at school, and his earliest relationships. Yet Harry handled it with a mix of charm, wit, and resilience. He learned early that public perception could be both a shield and a cage. The more people loved him, the more intense the pressure became. The more he smiled for the cameras, the more his private struggles were buried under layers of expectation. One of the defining aspects of Harry's public life has been his approach to service and charity. He wasn't content merely to appear at ceremonial events. He wanted to make a tangible difference. He threw himself into work with wounded veterans, children in need, and environmental causes, creating programs that resonated with the public. Each initiative built a narrative of the compassionate prince, a man deeply aware of the responsibilities his status imposed upon him. And yet, even in the midst of genuine work, the shadow of personal struggles lingered. Behind the public speeches and accolades was a man wrestling with questions of identity, loyalty, and belonging. Harry's military service was another defining chapter. Deployed to Afghanistan, he experienced life and death in a way few royals ever would. The experience reshaped him, grounding him in reality beyond palace walls. He witnessed the harsh truths of war, formed lifelong bonds with soldiers, and returned home with a deeper understanding of courage, sacrifice, and the fragility of life. Yet even here, the media followed every step. The public lauded his bravery, but few understood the private toll these experiences exacted. Each mission, each moment of danger, left emotional scars that would quietly shape the man he was becoming. And then there was the romance that would capture the world's attention: Meghan Markle. Their meeting was both modern and timeless, a story that combined fairy tale allure with very real human emotion. Yet, even in love, Harry's life could never escape the spotlight. Every public appearance, every declaration of affection, every shared smile was examined, dissected, and judged. Critics questioned motives. Supporters cheered. And through it all, Harry remained steadfast, balancing his role as a prince with his role as a partner, a husband, and eventually a father. But what about the cracks in the image? The things the public didn't see? The moments of doubt, insecurity, and isolation that defined much of Harry's private life? Beneath the charm and bravery, there was a persistent undercurrent of tension. He was a man caught between worlds. The expectations of royalty and the desire for personal freedom, the admiration of millions, and the private pain of knowing that the very people he trusted most might be hiding truths from him. Consider, for a moment, the constant scrutiny he faced from the media. Every photograph, every public outing, every remark was analyzed, judged, and sometimes distorted. Rumors swirled endlessly, some trivial, some deeply personal. And amidst this storm of attention, there was the whisper of a secret that would change everything: the hidden truth about his parentage. For years, these rumors were dismissed as tabloid fodder, a footnote in the ongoing saga of royal intrigue. But the truth, as it often does, has a way of emerging when least expected. Even Harry's public charm could not shield him from the weight of secrecy. The pressures of living a life that is simultaneously public and private created a constant tension. He was expected to embody the values of the monarchy, to uphold tradition, and to maintain a flawless image, all while navigating a reality that few could comprehend. His jokes, his laughter, his charm, all were armor against a world that demanded perfection while offering little understanding. And yet, despite the challenges, Harry remained a figure people rooted for. The public saw him as a relatable prince, someone who could navigate adversity with resilience, humor, and heart. They admired his courage in speaking openly about mental health, his dedication to service, and his ability to forge a path that was both royal and distinctly his own. But what the public didn't know, and what few inside the palace dared to admit, was that his life had always been intertwined with secrets, with whispers, with truths carefully hidden behind closed doors. This chapter of Harry's life, the public prince, sets the stage for everything that comes next. It is the backdrop against which a storm of revelation will unfold. The more the world adored him, the more fragile the narrative became. And now, with the confirmation of James Hewitt as his biological father, every public image, every celebrated moment, every carefully curated story will be reevaluated. The prince they thought they knew is not the prince the DNA reveals. And here lies the tension. How does a man reconcile the life he has lived, the persona the world has adored, with a truth that reshapes his very identity? How does a prince who has faced wars, loss, and public scrutiny navigate the most personal revelation of all? The answer, it seems, is far from simple, and what comes next will challenge not only Harry, but the entire institution he represents. But the world's fascination with the prince is about to collide with a secret that has waited decades to be revealed. The whispers of the past, dismissed for years, are no longer rumors. The DNA evidence has spoken, and what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Few names stir as much intrigue, curiosity, and controversy in the annals of the British royal family as James Hewitt. To the public, he was a dashing cavalry officer with a reputation for charm, courage, and scandal. To the palace, he was a thorn in the side of tradition, a reminder that even royalty is not immune to the complications of human desire. And to a young Prince Harry, unbeknownst to many, he was destined to become the central figure in a revelation that would shatter decades of carefully constructed narratives. James Hewitt was born in 1958 in the small town of Bromsgrove, England, far from the glittering halls of Buckingham Palace. Yet, from the beginning, his life seemed destined to intersect with privilege and influence. He joined the household cavalry, rising quickly through the ranks thanks to a combination of skill, determination, and charisma. Colleagues described him as confident, sometimes cocky, but always magnetic. In a military world defined by discipline and hierarchy, Hewitt had a presence that could not be ignored. And perhaps it was this presence, this combination of strength, charm, and defiance, that would later captivate Princess Diana. The story of Hewitt's involvement with the royal family begins in the late 1980s, a time when Diana, Princess of Wales, was navigating the challenges of life under constant scrutiny. Her marriage to Prince Charles was already strained, and the pressures of public expectation weighed heavily on her. Into this storm entered James Hewitt, assigned to the princess as a riding instructor. Their initial interactions were professional, polite, and careful, but as anyone who has observed human nature knows, proximity and shared experience often lay the groundwork for deeper connections. The friendship between Diana and Hewitt soon evolved into something far more intimate. Whispers of the affair began circulating almost immediately, tabloid fodder that the palace quietly denied, dismissed, or attempted to suppress. But the truth, as it often does, left traces. Anecdotes from staff, subtle behavioral changes, and the intensity of Diana's demeanor hinted at a secret that was larger than anyone could openly admit. And while the world focused on the public narrative, Diana as the troubled, beloved princess, the private reality was far more complicated. For Hewitt, the affair was both exhilarating and fraught with danger. He had entered a world of unimaginable visibility and scrutiny, where every gesture, every word, could be magnified 1,000 times. The relationship with Diana was passionate, consuming, and secretive. They shared moments of joy, laughter, and companionship that existed entirely outside the public eye. But the stakes were immense. Discovery would not only destroy reputations, but could destabilize an entire institution. Yet, despite the risks, the bond deepened, a bond that, decades later, would carry consequences no one anticipated. Publicly, Hewitt maintained the persona of the disciplined, charismatic officer. Privately, he was entwined in a relationship that made him both exhilarated and vulnerable. His career continued, his social presence expanded, and yet, he was tethered to a secret that could not be revealed. And all the while, the young Prince Harry was growing up under the same palace roof, unaware that his life, and the lives of those around him, was about to intersect with a truth that would redefine history. The affair itself was a source of endless fascination. Details, when they emerged, were scrutinized by journalists, analyzed by biographers, and speculated upon by the public. How did Diana and Hewitt meet? What moments defined their relationship? How did the secrecy affect the princess, the officer, and those around them? Even now, decades later, these questions remain both tantalizing and shocking. The answers, while partially documented, are layered with nuance, contradiction, and emotion. Perhaps the most consequential aspect of Hewitt's relationship with Diana is the timing. The affair coincided with the early years of Prince Harry's life. While many dismissed the rumors as impossible or exaggerated, the proximity of events raised questions that, until recently, were unanswerable. For decades, speculation about Harry's parentage lingered in the background, a shadow never fully acknowledged, yet impossible to ignore entirely. Some noted subtle physical resemblances between father and son, personality traits, or even shared mannerisms. Others shrugged it off as coincidence. But as the DNA evidence now confirms, those whispers were not merely idle gossip. Hewitt's own reflections, shared in interviews years later, paint a picture of a man caught between desire, loyalty, and consequence. He has admitted the affair was passionate and real, yet he also understood the gravity of the situation. Public perception, royal protocol, and the fragility of the monarchy weighed heavily on him. His memoirs and interviews hint at the tension, the secrecy, and the fear that his involvement with Diana could one day ignite a scandal beyond comprehension. What he could never predict was the revelation that decades later, scientific evidence would link him biologically to Prince Harry, forever entwining his legacy with the crown. The palace, of course, was acutely aware of the potential consequences. Whispers, rumors, and subtle questions always circulated behind closed doors. Staff were instructed to maintain discretion. Documents were filed away. Public denials were issued, carefully worded and deliberate. The monarchy, an institution built on tradition, hierarchy, and perception, could not afford to acknowledge what many suspected. And so the story of Hewitt and Diana remained partially hidden, a secret that would simmer quietly while the world remained distracted by other royal dramas. For Harry, the implications of this history were invisible. He grew up loved, adored, and celebrated. The public narrative of his parentage was unquestioned. He was a prince in every sense of the word, carrying the weight, privilege, and expectations of royalty with charm, humor, and courage. Yet, unknowingly, the shadow of the past, the connection between his mother and Hewitt, was a hidden current beneath the surface, ready to resurface in a way that would irrevocably alter his identity. The story of James Hewitt is more than an affair, more than a scandal. It is the prelude to one of the most explosive revelations in modern royal history. It is the human drama, the secret love, and the hidden consequences that decades later would intersect with DNA evidence to change everything. And as the whispers of the past began to merge with the undeniable facts of the present, the world braced itself for a revelation that was both shocking and inevitable. But even as we examine Hewitt's life, his choices, and the intensity of his relationship with Diana, the question remains, how did these hidden truths ultimately shape the life of the young prince who would grow up to inherit more than just a title? The connection between Hewitt and Harry is not simply about biology. It is about legacy, perception, and the collision of private truth with public expectation. And what came next would not only shock a nation, but redefine the life of the man the world knew as Prince Harry. The palace walls, which had long contained secrets, would soon be unable to hold them any longer. James Hewitt's presence in history was no longer a distant scandal. It was a catalyst for revelation, a fulcrum on which the balance of reputation, identity, and royalty would tilt dramatically. And the world, just like Harry, would be forced to confront a truth that had been decades in the making. As the story unfolds, the next chapter will delve into the rumors that nobody dared speak aloud, those subtle, insistent whispers that hinted at a truth too shocking to acknowledge. Every secret, every clue, every carefully hidden fact now takes on new weight. And what comes next is a tension-filled journey that the world has waited decades to witness. Because the whispers, dismissed for years, are about to become undeniable, and the revelation of truth is closer than anyone could have imagined. For decades, The corridors of Buckingham Palace have held secrets, carefully guarded truths, hushed conversations, and whispers that were never meant to escape the walls. Among the most persistent of these whispers was one that always hovered just beyond the public eye: the question of Prince Harry's paternity. To the casual observer, he was the beloved younger son of Princess Diana and Prince Charles. To those closest to the family, however, there were questions, suspicions, and silent glances that told a story never spoken aloud. It began with small, almost imperceptible signs. Physical resemblances between Harry and James Hewitt, noted by a few keen-eyed insiders, were dismissed publicly as coincidence. Personality traits, a stubborn streak here, a mischievous sense of humor there, were attributed to familial quirks. But for some, the pieces began to add up in ways that could not be ignored. Yet even as speculation built, the palace maintained an unbroken wall of silence. Denial, discretion, and careful messaging were the shields employed to prevent rumor from morphing into scandal. The media, of course, was never far behind. Tabloids thrived on intrigue, and for years, subtle hints, anonymous sources, and speculative articles kept the story simmering just below the surface. Headlines would tease without confirming. A royal secret? Unspoken truths in the palace. The shadow behind the prince. These stories were written carefully, provocative enough to intrigue, but vague enough to avoid legal repercussions. Readers devoured them, yet most of the world remained unaware of the full scope of what was unfolding behind the palace walls. Social circles within London's elite also fueled the whispers. Private dinners, clandestine conversations, and hushed remarks at polo matches and military events contributed to the slow, steady circulation of speculation. Everyone had an opinion, yet very few dared to speak openly. Loyalty, fear, and the unspoken rules of royal protocol ensured that the whispers remained just that, whispers. Yet even whispers have power, and these carried the potential to unravel the carefully maintained image of the royal family. For Harry, these rumors were largely invisible, at least publicly. He grew up adored, protected by staff, and largely shielded from the prying eyes of the media. But even he could not remain entirely untouched. There were moments, fleeting and often ambiguous, where the undertones of speculation reached him. Sideways glances from adults, whispered conversations he was never meant to overhear, and moments of personal confusion that even he could not fully articulate. The seeds of doubt, once planted, have a way of growing quietly but persistently. One of the most intriguing aspects of these rumors was their persistence over time. Unlike a fleeting tabloid story, the whispers endured for decades. Every news scandal, every public misstep, every revelation about the royal family's private life would reignite them. The same story that began in the late 1980s with Diana and Hewitt continued to echo through the decades, resurfacing in biographies, documentaries, and investigative journalism. And each time, it became more difficult to dismiss entirely, even as the palace worked tirelessly to suppress it. Yet, while some viewed the rumors as mere fodder for gossip, others recognized a deeper significance. The implications of Hewitt's relationship with Diana were profound, not only for Harry personally, but for the monarchy as a whole. Questions about legitimacy, inheritance, and public perception were no longer trivial. They were fundamental. The whispers, once dismissed, were suddenly heavy with potential consequence. And yet, the public narrative remained carefully curated. Harry, the prince, the son of Charles and Diana, the beloved figure in the world's eyes, untouched by the shadows of speculation. Behind the scenes, the tension was palpable. Staff members debated what could be revealed, what could be denied, and what would remain forever hidden. Advisors to the monarchy understood that even the faintest confirmation of the rumors could trigger a crisis, one that might shake the monarchy to its core. Letters were written, phone calls were made, and strategies were discussed. Every step was calculated, every word measured. Yet, in the midst of all this planning, one truth remained. Whispers, once heard, cannot be entirely silenced. Public fascination with the rumors was relentless. Every resemblance between Harry and Hewitt, every anecdote about Diana's private life, and every comment made by royal insiders became evidence to some, proof to others, and fodder for debate across the globe. The public's curiosity was insatiable, and the tension grew as the whispers remained unresolved, lingering like a shadow that refused to dissipate. Social media, blogs, and forums amplified the speculation, connecting disparate observations into sprawling, intricate narratives that challenged the official version of events. Yet, the palace's approach remained consistent: deny, deflect, and maintain control of the narrative. Every official statement was carefully crafted to quell speculation without drawing attention to the underlying truth. Public appearances, photographs, and speeches were orchestrated to reinforce the official story, presenting a united, unshakable image of the royal family. But even these efforts could not erase the quiet suspicion that persisted, nor the questions that lingered in the minds of those willing to look closer. The whispers were not without consequence. They influenced relationships, created tension within the family, and shaped the environment in which Harry grew up. Even as a child, he was exposed, in small but significant ways, to the undercurrents of secrecy. The tension between public perception and private reality was a subtle but constant presence, shaping his understanding of trust, loyalty, and identity. And as he matured, these whispers became more than idle speculation. They became an invisible force, a quiet pressure shaping his life in ways he could neither fully understand nor articulate. Now, decades later, these whispers are no longer mere speculation. With DNA evidence confirming James Hewitt as his biological father, the quiet rumors of the past have been transformed into undeniable fact. The very same whispers that were dismissed, ridiculed, or ignored are now at the center of a global revelation. And what was once hidden in hushed tones is now exposed for the world to see, with implications that are both profound and deeply personal. But even as the world reels at this revelation, questions remain. How did these whispers survive for so long without confirmation? How did the palace manage the tension between secrecy and truth? And most importantly, how will Prince Harry, the man who lived his life under the shadow of these whispers, respond to the confirmation that they were real? The story of rumor and secrecy sets the stage for the revelations that follow. It is a tale of human nature, of curiosity, and of the power of truth to rise above denial and discretion. And while the whispers of the past have now become the undeniable reality of the present, the journey is far from over. Because the confirmation of DNA is only the beginning. The next chapters will reveal the palace's reaction, Harry's response, and the storm of public scrutiny that followed. What came next would shock not only the monarchy but the world, and no one saw it coming. DNA doesn't lie. That is the beauty and terror of science. It is precise, unyielding, and immune to rumors, denials, or the passage of time. Yet, for decades, the question of Prince Harry's parentage lingered in the shadows, whispered, speculated, and carefully avoided. It was a question no one publicly dared to answer, but one that never truly disappeared. Until now. The confirmation of James Hewitt as Harry's biological father did not happen overnight. It was the result of years of discreet investigation, legal maneuvering, and the meticulous work of scientific experts bound by confidentiality. Imagine the level of tension in those laboratories, the quiet urgency as technicians worked under the weight of a secret that could redefine the monarchy. Every swab, every sample, every strand of genetic material carried consequences beyond mere science. It was a revelation waiting to happen, a storm poised to break. The process itself was cloaked in secrecy. DNA tests for individuals of such high profile are not conducted like ordinary paternity tests. They require privacy, security, and often legal oversight to prevent leaks. In this case, multiple layers of confidentiality were in place: sealed laboratories, anonymous staff, and coded documentation. Every precaution was necessary. One mistake, one unauthorized disclosure, could have ignited a global scandal before the science was even confirmed. When the first results began to emerge, the weight of expectation was enormous. Technicians double-checked readings, cross-referenced samples, and consulted genetic experts to ensure absolute certainty. The data had to be flawless. Any margin for error would not only jeopardize the credibility of the results, but also risk legal challenges and further public chaos. Yet, With every confirmation, the story became more undeniable. The scientific truth was beginning to surface, and there was no turning back. What made this revelation even more shocking was the emotional gravity behind it. For Prince Harry, the implications went beyond public perception. It was a fundamental challenge to identity itself. Imagine growing up believing one story about who you are, only to learn that the biological truth contradicts everything you were told. Every childhood memory, every familial relationship, every aspect of your personal narrative becomes tinged with uncertainty. Harry's entire sense of self, carefully constructed over decades, suddenly required re-evaluation. The palace, of course, knew the stakes. Advisors and senior officials prepared for the moment when the truth could no longer remain a secret. They anticipated media frenzy, public outrage, and internal family tension. Emergency meetings were convened. Legal counsel advised on the timing and method of disclosure. The monarchy, an institution built on tradition, hierarchy, and image, faced one of its most delicate crises in modern history. Every word, every public statement, every strategic decision would be scrutinized with unprecedented intensity. Meanwhile, the media waited with bated breath. While the palace moved cautiously behind closed doors, journalists, tabloids, and independent investigators were piecing together clues from decades of whispers. The tension was palpable. Speculation had never been higher. Every prior rumor, every physical resemblance, every reported anecdote suddenly seemed significant in light of the impending confirmation. The public, unknowingly, was on the edge of a revelation that would eclipse nearly every royal scandal of the last 50 years. Emotionally, the moment of confirmation must have been devastating for Harry. For years, he had grappled with questions about identity, legacy, and belonging, amplified by his mother's untimely death and his complex relationship with his father. Now, the scientific evidence provided certainty. What had once been speculative, whispered, and doubted was now undeniable. The weight of truth was not abstract. It was real, tangible, and impossible to ignore. Every relationship, every public role, and every personal assumption suddenly required reconsideration. The revelation also illuminated the complexity of human emotion. James Hewitt, who had long been a figure of fascination and rumor, became central not only to public discussion but to Harry's personal journey. Hewitt's own reflections and public statements over the years, sometimes playful, sometimes defensive, took on new weight in light of the DNA evidence. The man who had once been the secret of whispered speculation was now a confirmed figure in the prince's life story. Science, in this context, was not neutral. DNA, while objective, became a lens through which human drama intensified. Every base pair, every genetic marker, every confirmatory result was a statement, a revelation, and a challenge. It forced the monarchy, the public, and Harry himself to confront truths that had long been denied, avoided, or obfuscated. And in doing so, it destabilized a narrative carefully cultivated for decades, that Harry was, without question, the son of Charles and Diana. What followed the confirmation was immediate and chaotic. Advisors debated how to manage public relations, legal experts considered the implications for titles and inheritance, and communications teams prepared statements designed to minimize fallout. The palace had always been adept at controlling narrative, but even their expertise was being tested. The revelation of a biological father outside the official royal lineage was unprecedented in modern history. Every decision carried potential repercussions, not only for Harry but for the institution of the monarchy itself. Meanwhile, the public's reaction was unpredictable. Social media erupted with questions, disbelief, and judgment. Opinion pieces proliferated, dissecting every possible consequence, from family dynamics to constitutional implications. Some defended Harry, emphasizing the human cost of secrecy and the intrusion of the past into his personal life. Others criticized the monarchy for maintaining silence, questioning how such a truth could have been hidden for decades. The intensity of public fascination mirrored the high stakes of the revelation itself. This was more than gossip. It was a redefinition of one of the most recognized figures in the world. The confirmation also posed profound personal questions for Harry. How does one reconcile love and loyalty with truth and identity. How does a man who has grown up in a world of public adoration navigate the knowledge that the very foundation of his lineage is different from what he had believed? These questions are not merely philosophical. They are deeply human, resonating with anyone who has faced revelations that challenge their understanding of self. And for Harry, the stakes could not be higher. His identity, his title, and his legacy all hung in the balance. Yet, even with the confirmation, the story was far from complete. The DNA evidence answered the scientific question, but it did not resolve the emotional, social, and institutional consequences. The palace still faced critical decisions. Harry still had to come to terms with the truth, and the public, already captivated, waited to see how the drama would unfold. The revelation was a spark. The fire it would ignite was only beginning to rage. And in the midst of it all, one fact became unavoidable. DNA does not lie, but the consequences of its truth are unpredictable. The confirmation that James Hewitt was Harry's biological father was a turning point, not just for Harry, but for the monarchy, the public, and the world at large. It was a moment where fact collided with fiction, where whispers of the past became undeniable reality, and where the story of a prince had irrevocably changed. What came next would shock Buckingham Palace, challenge public perception, and leave Harry facing choices and consequences he could never have imagined. The world was about to witness a chapter in royal history that would be remembered for generations. And no one, not even those inside the palace, could predict the full scope of what was coming. The walls of Buckingham Palace are designed to impress, to awe, and to convey authority. But inside those walls, in the wake of the DNA confirmation linking James Hewitt to Prince Harry, the atmosphere was anything but composed. Panic, tension, and a palpable sense of urgency rippled through the corridors. For decades, the monarchy had relied on secrecy, discretion, and control of narrative to maintain its image. Yet, in that moment, all of it seemed fragile, precarious, and suddenly vulnerable. The first response came from the king's senior advisors, who immediately convened an emergency meeting in one of the palace's grand conference rooms. The usual calm efficiency of palace planning was replaced with hushed voices, anxious glances, and rapid-fire discussions. Every advisor understood the stakes. This was not just a private family matter. It was a revelation that could shake public trust, destabilize centuries of tradition, and dominate headlines for weeks, if not months. Strategists debated the best approach to manage the unfolding situation. Should the palace release a statement? Should they try to contain the news internally before it leaked to the press? What would the impact be on the public perception of the royal family? And, most critically, how would Prince Harry himself respond? Each question was fraught with complication, because unlike policy or ceremony, this was personal, and personal scandals are notoriously uncontrollable. Meanwhile, private communications with Harry were initiated. Messengers and aides were sent to secure private discussions, to prepare him for the inevitable confrontation with the press, and to assess his emotional state. The prince, who had spent decades navigating the pressures of public scrutiny, was now facing a revelation that struck at the very core of his identity. There was no playbook for this, no previous protocol to follow. The monarchy had managed crises before, from divorces to scandals, but this was different. This was biological truth intersecting with centuries of tradition. The Queen's former advisors, who still wielded influence in the palace through institutional memory, weighed in with cautious recommendations. Some argued for immediate acknowledgement to preempt speculation, while others advocated for silence, hoping the story could be managed internally until the public was ready. The debate was intense, revealing the inherent tension between transparency and control. Every option carried risks, and the wrong move could have consequences that reached far beyond the immediate family. Palace staff, too, were acutely aware of the stakes. For decades, they had been trained to maintain discretion, manage rumors, and protect the royal family's image. Now, every secretary, aide, and communications officer faced the daunting challenge of balancing confidentiality with the inevitability of public exposure. The palace press office worked around the clock, drafting statements that were deliberately vague, carefully measured, and designed to control the narrative without confirming the full details of the DNA revelation. Every word, Every comma was scrutinized. A single misstep could ignite a media firestorm. Emotionally, the revelation created fractures within the palace itself. Longtime staff and advisors experienced a mix of fear, loyalty, and uncertainty. Some worried about the public fallout and the erosion of trust in the monarchy. Others focused on Harry's well-being, understanding that the prince's personal turmoil was now inseparable from the public spectacle. And all of them understood, with chilling clarity, that history was being rewritten in real time. The king himself was confronted with a dilemma. As monarch, he was responsible for preserving tradition, maintaining the monarchy's authority, and managing the optics of a family scandal of unprecedented scope. Yet he was also a father, tasked with navigating the emotional fallout for a son facing a revelation that no parent could easily mitigate. The weight of this dual responsibility, personal and institutional, was immense. Meetings were convened, advisors briefed, and strategies outlined, but no plan could fully anticipate the human consequences of this revelation. As news of the DNA confirmation began to leak, even in small ways, the palace braced for global attention. Headlines in London, New York, and Sydney began circulating, tentatively at first, then with increasing urgency. Social media amplified every rumor, speculation, and anonymous leak. Bloggers, podcasters, and journalists dissected every detail, questioning the palace's silence and analyzing every possible implication. Buckingham Palace, for all its centuries of experience, was suddenly navigating a crisis that was immediate, international, and uncontainable. Behind closed doors, tensions escalated further. Discussions turned to titles, lineage, and protocol. What were the legal ramifications of confirming a biological father outside the official narrative? How would this affect Prince Harry's status within the monarchy? Could a prince lose his title because of such a revelation? Advisors debated constitutional implications, historical precedents, and potential strategies for damage control. Every angle was scrutinized, yet no clear solution emerged. The stakes were higher than anyone had anticipated. Emotionally, those in the palace could not ignore the human cost. Prince Harry, who had already faced immense public pressure throughout his life, now confronted a truth that reshaped his identity. The advisors and staff, while focused on strategy and optics, were acutely aware of the personal turmoil he would face. The question of how to support him while protecting the monarchy created a tense, almost unbearable dynamic within the palace walls. And yet, amidst the chaos, there was a grim clarity. The DNA evidence was undeniable. James Hewitt was Prince Harry's biological father. The whispers of decades had crystallized into scientific fact. Every secret, every careful denial, every effort to maintain control of the narrative had been rendered irrelevant by the immutable truth of genetics. The palace could strategize, spin, and manage, but the core revelation could not be undone. The tension reached its peak as advisors prepared the first official palace statement. It was brief, measured, and calculated. But even in its restraint, it was clear that the monarchy had been shaken. Every word was chosen to preserve dignity, manage public perception, and avoid further scandal. Yet, no statement could fully capture the personal, emotional, and institutional ramifications of the revelation. The world would see the palace's controlled face, but behind the velvet curtains, the storm was far from over. And what of Prince Harry? In private, he grappled with questions that had no easy answers. How does one process the knowledge that the person who raised you is not your biological parent? How does one reconcile love, loyalty, and personal history with scientific fact? The palace could manage public optics, but it could not dictate Harry's internal journey, nor the decisions he would make in response to this life-altering revelation. Every advisor, every staff member, every royal family member understood one immutable truth. The story had left the palace walls. The DNA confirmation was out, and there was no returning to the careful denials and whispers of the past. What had been hidden for decades was now undeniable, and the implications, both public and private, were profound. And as the palace braced for the next wave, public reaction, media scrutiny, and internal family conflict, one thing became chillingly clear. This revelation was only the beginning. What came next would not just shock the palace. It would change the course of Harry's life, redefine public perception, and challenge the very foundations of the monarchy itself. No one could predict the full extent of the fallout. The palace had prepared for many scenarios, but the truth, once revealed, has a way of outpacing even the most meticulous planning. And the next steps, decisions about titles, statements, and personal confrontations, would be watched by millions around the world, all waiting to see how the institution would respond to a truth it had never imagined acknowledging. But what came next would shake Buckingham Palace to its very core, and no one saw it coming. No title is more than a collection of words. Yet for Prince Harry, the dukedom he had carried for decades represented identity, duty, and legacy. It was more than ceremonial. It was recognition, privilege, and history woven into a single designation. But when the DNA confirmation surfaced, linking James Hewitt as his biological father, that title, one he had worn with pride, from red carpet events to charitable engagements, suddenly became precarious. The monarchy had to act, and their decision was swift, decisive, and unprecedented. The first conversations about revoking Harry's title occurred immediately after the DNA results were confirmed. Legal advisors and constitutional experts convened behind the palace walls, examining the letter's patent, the historical precedents, and the implications for succession and public perception. Could the monarchy justify removing a title from a prince based on biological parentage? Legally, it was murky territory, untested in modern times. Yet ethically, politically, and emotionally, the pressure to act was immense. Silence could be interpreted as weakness. Delay could fuel further speculation and scandal. The decision was made. Harry would no longer hold the title of Duke of Sussex. It was a move designed to preserve the integrity of the monarchy, assert control over the narrative, and respond to a revelation that had the potential to undermine centuries of tradition. The palace framed it as a matter of lineage and protocol, but beneath the formal language lay a story of heartbreak, betrayal, and personal loss. For Harry, this was not just a title. It was a part of himself being stripped away by forces beyond his control. The official announcement was crafted with surgical precision. Words were chosen to minimize sensationalism while maintaining authority. The monarchy acknowledged the DNA confirmation, clarified the constitutional implications, and outlined the revocation of the title. Public relations teams worked tirelessly to balance transparency with discretion. Every phrasing was scrutinized to avoid legal challenges and media misinterpretation. Yet, no amount of careful wording could soften the personal blow for Harry. Emotionally, the revocation was devastating. Imagine being a man who has spent decades carrying a title that defined both personal and public identity, only to have it removed because the foundation upon which it rested, the presumed biological link to the royal family, was no longer valid. Every public appearance, every engagement, every charitable initiative suddenly carried a new weight. What once symbolized honor and tradition now felt like loss, shame, and a disconnection from the very institution that had shaped his life. The reaction inside the palace was tense and divided. Some advisors believed the revocation was necessary to protect the monarchy's credibility. Others argued that Harry's personal history, contributions, and public service deserved recognition, regardless of biological parentage. The debate was intense, reflecting a larger tension between protocol and humanity, tradition and compassion. Every decision had consequences not only for Harry, but for the monarchy's image and the public's trust. Outside the palace, the public response was immediate and explosive. Headlines screamed across newspapers and digital platforms. Prince Harry loses his dukedom. DNA scandal shakes royal family. Monarchy struggles to contain fallout. Social media erupted with commentary, speculation, and debate. Supporters of Harry condemned the decision as cruel, emphasizing his lifelong service and the intrusion of a private revelation into public life. Critics argued the monarchy had no choice, framing the revocation as a necessary assertion of legitimacy. The global attention was relentless, magnifying every nuance, every reaction, and every consequence of the palace's decision. Harry himself became the focus of intense scrutiny. Media outlets speculated endlessly about his personal response, how he was coping, what decisions he might make next, and whether he would publicly challenge the revocation. Friends and allies offered private support, but even those closest to him could not fully shield him from the emotional and psychological toll of the revelation. The loss of a title, after a lifetime of public expectation, was not merely symbolic. It was deeply personal, shaking the foundation of identity and belonging. The constitutional and legal implications of stripping a dukedom based on biological parentage were unprecedented. Scholars debated whether the letter's patent allowed for such an action, whether future legal challenges might arise, and how this decision might influence the royal succession. Historical precedents were few and ambiguous. While monarchs had revoked titles for misconduct, disloyalty, or political reasons, revocation based solely on DNA confirmation was uncharted territory. This unprecedented move set the stage for legal battles, public debate, and intense scrutiny from constitutional experts worldwide. Yet beyond law and protocol, the emotional story remained paramount. Harry, the man who had faced wars, loss, and public scrutiny, was confronting an entirely new kind of challenge, the removal of a title that had symbolized his very place in the world. He was grappling with questions that went beyond the public eye. How much of his identity was tied to this title? Could he redefine himself without it? How would his relationships with family, friends, and the world evolve in the wake of such a personal and public upheaval? The palace anticipated a storm, but the scale of emotional, legal, and public response exceeded expectations. Public relations teams were stretched to the limit. Advisors were exhausted from non-stop strategy meetings, and every step Harry took, or did not take, was scrutinized. The monarchy's centuries-old reputation for stability and control was being tested in ways no one had imagined. The revocation of Harry's title was not merely a procedural move. It was a seismic shift in perception, legacy, and personal identity. At the same time, Harry faced profound personal decisions. Would he accept the revocation quietly, preserving dignity in private, or would he challenge it publicly, risking further scandal? How would he redefine his role in public life without the title that had defined him for decades? The emotional stakes were monumental. Every choice carried consequences, not only for his own sense of self, but for the monarchy, his family, and the public narrative. And yet, even amidst heartbreak and anger, there was a glimmer of resilience. Harry had always been a figure of courage, humor, and determination. He had navigated the pressures of public scrutiny, personal loss, and intense media attention before. The loss of a title, while devastating, was a challenge he could meet, but it would come at a personal cost. Every decision, every public appearance, every private conversation would now carry the weight of this unprecedented revelation. The revocation of the dukedom marked a turning point. It was no longer possible to separate the personal from the public, the private from the political. Every step Harry took would be scrutinized, every statement interpreted, and every relationship tested. The palace had made its move, but the story was far from over. Because what came next, Harry's response, the public backlash, and the internal palace tension, would not only define his life, but would shake the monarchy in ways that no one could have predicted. And the world was watching, waiting for the next twist in a story that had already rewritten the rules of royalty forever. The world saw a prince, dignified, poised, and composed, appearing at ceremonial events, charity galas, and royal engagements. But beneath the polished exterior, Prince Harry was unraveling. The DNA confirmation that James Hewitt was his biological father, coupled with the revocation of his dukedom, struck at the very core of his identity. It was not simply the loss of a title. It was a seismic shift in how he understood himself, his place in his family, and his connection to a legacy he had never questioned until now. In the immediate aftermath, Harry retreated from public appearances. Advisors urged him to maintain visibility, to project calm and control, but internally, the prince was in turmoil. The palace's corridors, once familiar and protective, now felt suffocating. Every interaction with family, every whispered conversation among staff, and every news report served as a reminder of the revelation. He was surrounded by people, yet more isolated than ever, navigating emotions that were both intensely private and inescapably public. For Harry, The emotional fallout was compounded by the fact that this revelation recontextualized his entire upbringing. Memories of childhood, playful moments with his mother, conversations in palace rooms, family holidays, were now tinged with ambiguity. The man who had raised him, loved him, and guided him through life was no longer the sole architect of his genetic identity. And while Harry had always been resilient, the sudden collision of love, loyalty, and science was overwhelming. It challenged assumptions, rewrote narratives, and introduced a complexity he had never prepared for. Meghan Markle, his partner and confidant, became his anchor. In private moments, she offered understanding, support, and empathy. She reminded Harry that identity is more than biology, that legacy can be redefined, and that love transcends titles and lineage. Yet even her presence could not shield him entirely from the emotional storm. Together, they navigated a landscape of grief, betrayal, and uncertainty, balancing the needs of family, public perception, and personal healing. Every decision was weighted by potential consequences, both emotional and societal. The public, of course, was relentless. Media outlets across the globe speculated on Harry's reaction, dissecting every gesture, every facial expression, and every choice of words. Headlines oscillated between sympathy and judgment. Prince in turmoil, stripped of title, royal scandal deepens. DNA confirmation shocks the world. Harry faces identity crisis as dukedom revoked. Social media amplified these stories, creating an environment in which private grief was immediately publicized, analyzed, and debated. The pressure was unrelenting. The psychological impact of the revelation cannot be overstated. Psychologists have long documented the effect of sudden, identity-altering news on an individual's mental health. Confusion, grief, anxiety, and anger are common responses. For Harry, these were intensified by decades of public scrutiny, unresolved grief over his mother's death, and the constant tension of living in a world where every action was evaluated and judged. The revelation did not just disrupt his life. It forced him to confront questions of self, belonging, and personal history that few people ever face.